Hello, and welcome to Roundtable with Legislators on Energy and Climate Solutions. I'm Linda Gray. I'm from Norwich, and I've been active with our town energy committee since 2008. And I've also been on the board of Vermont Conservation Voters since 2015. And that's because my energy committee work has led me to see that there's a clear connection between getting neighbors to weatherize or go solar and statewide and federal policies. So this webinar is the second of three that make up our 16th annual VECAN conference. As you know, VECAN's the network of over 120 Vermont town energy committees and the organizations that support them. So these committees are leading a very powerful grassroots response to the pressing need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by being more energy efficient and generating more in-state renewable energy. VECAN as a network strives to support Vermont's energy committees, give them the support and the tools and the capacities to meet our climate challenges. So today, we'll hear from three Vermont legislators, and we're going to allow them to introduce themselves and the work they do, and then ask some policy questions and have ample time for you all to ask questions too. We have some questions that VECAN members submitted while registering, and then we'll select questions through the chat. And I want to do just a little table setting. So I have three items to share. First, on November 17th and 18th, just a few weeks ago,
Yeah, I think so.
the world was, on average, warmer by 2 degrees Celsius than pre-industrial levels. And that's for the first time in modern history. And that's the upper limit set under the Paris Agreement. Second, I read over and over from climate scientists that every 10th of a degree of warming matters. One says there's a range of possible futures that temperatures could go up by 1.7 degrees Celsius globally or by 3 degrees. Millions of lives hang in that balance. So it's a huge deal that we get it as right as possible. And then third, in its latest report, the International Energy Agency projected that we'd hit peak fossil fuel use in 2030. But the U.S. Energy Information Administration saw fossil fuel use rising through at least 2050. So the difference between these two agencies' models is in how they treat government policy. The international analysis assumes countries will follow through with more climate-friendly policies and renew the ones they already have on the books. The U.S. analysis doesn't take into account any policies that countries have yet to implement. Bottom line, it's policy and only policy that makes the difference in outcomes. So let's start talking about Vermont policies. I want to introduce today's legislators, and we have Representative Laura Sibilia. She is the House Environment and Energy Committee Vice Chair. She represents Wyndham 2, and that covers Dover, Jamaica, Somerset, Stratton, and Wardsboro. And in addition to serving as a legislator, she's on the Dover School Board, and she's Director of Regional Economic Development Strategies and Programs at the Brattleboro Development Credit Cooperative. And next, Representative Gabrielle Stebbins. She is House Environment and Energy Committee member, and she's Climate Solutions Caucus co-chair. She represents Chittenden 13, that's a southern portion of Burlington, and she served throughout the world as a classical violinist, a counselor at a women's health clinic, a researcher on child labor and human rights issues, a park ranger, a river restoration manager, a community organizer on air quality and public safety, an energy efficiency program coordinator, and executive director of Vermont's Renewable Energy Trade Association. When not at the legislature, she works as a managing consultant at Heinsberg-based Energy Futures Group. And third, we have Senator Andrew Perchlik. He is a member of the Senate Transportation Committee and the Senate Appropriations Vice Chair. He represents all of Washington County plus Stowe. And Senator Perchlik was the founding executive director of Renewable Energy Vermont and currently works as director of the Clean Energy Development Fund at the Vermont Department of Public Service. So many, many thanks to all three of you guys for joining us today and offering your expertise to the VECAN network. So we want to start by asking each legislator to just speak about the work that they've done and the work they're planning for the 2024 legislative session in the area of energy and climate. And just 4 minutes, please, for each. And let's start with Representative Sibilia.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me this morning. I am I'm also a co-chair of the Rural Caucus in the House, and rural issues are incredibly important to me. That is the district that I represent. My rural areas, like many of your rural areas and much of Vermont, have seen some pretty extreme events from climate change. And both that and being a mom have motivated my work in the House on climate change. I've been incredibly fortunate to work with some really incredible legislators, Representative Tim Briglin, who's no longer with us, and led passage, he is still on this earth, no longer, unfortunately, in the State House, but helped us led passage, actually, of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which, as you know, sets the Paris Agreement emissions reductions in statute. Building off of that work, we have passed last year, finally, with the help of other key legislators on this panel, the Clean Heat Standard. We have also passed legislation working with a lot of our town energy committees, the Municipal Energy Resilience Project that I expect a lot of you are engaged in now, to help our communities reduce fossil fuel usage and adapt to this massive energy transition that's ongoing. We also last year worked on technical assistance for communities in terms of other flood-related projects and making sure that they're able to maximize access to existing federal resources that have been in. Right now, I am one of the 2 House members on the working group for the Renewable Energy Standard. That working group's time is coming to a close. I think it was good for that group to gather. We are not finished, but I think we got a lot done there. And so I think with that, Linda, I'll pass the baton.
You're muted, Linda.
Sorry. Thank you very much. And next, let's hear from Representative Stebbins.
Great. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everybody. So the one item that my Representative Sibilia did not mention was, I didn't hear her mention, was H126 from last year, which was a climate resilience bill focused on identifying conservation goals and planning how we might look at Vermont from a lens of where do we need to prioritize preservation of some of our most critical natural resources, and then related to the home bill that we passed last year, where do we make sure that we have housing and water and infrastructure for the people that make up our state. In terms of what I see or what I hope to see this coming year, there have been so much work. Representative Sibilia mentioned the RES working group. There's also been a working group really focused on land use reform, on looking at Act 250 and looking on how that process is handled across the state. And there's also been a working group focused on building energy standards and code. We currently do not have any enforcement unless a particular community, such as Burlington, that I represent, has administrative capacity within their community to make sure that buildings are built to be as resilient, as efficient, and as healthy as possible. So I would expect to see some language this coming January related to land use reform and related to building energy code. Where that lands, I don't know. I know there's also been a lot of discussion about how we're going to pay for all of these things. So last year, there was language set aside to ask our treasurer, Pichak, to pull together folks to think about how we might actually ensure that we are capturing as much federal dollars as possible through the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's been a lot of work also with regards to figuring out what the financing tools and the models might be to make sure that homeowners, businesses, communities are all able to shift off fossil fuels and become as efficient as possible. I'm also a co-chair of Vermont's Climate Workforce Coalition. And so in that capacity, we've also been working on sort of the side of climate change that's a bit of a win-win-win in the sense that we have a real opportunity for really good paying jobs for climate-related careers. But folks don't necessarily know what those are and how to access them and what the training opportunities are. And so hopefully we'll see some movement in that world as well. And just a couple of others. Last year, the Climate Solutions Caucus did identify S42 or I think it's 197, related to divesting from state pension funds. And that is something that I know, again, our treasurer and our various House committees and Senate committees have been working on. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention an effort towards a bill called H242 to allow, for example, municipalities to support networked geothermal systems. We know we have a huge housing challenge. It makes no sense to build our future homes, which last for 100, 150 years, in a way that's inefficient or poorly planned. So if a group of 30 or 40 small buildings can figure out a way to have a shared geothermal system, we should figure out how to allow that via a regulatory process. And then there is also a rivers and some wetlands bills on our bill currently that I believe we'll take some testimony on. And that certainly relates to climate resilience and how we plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Stebbins. And now Senator Perchley.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And I should point out that there's 2 other towns outside of Washington County I represent, in case anybody is from those towns and feel unrepresented. That's Braintree and the town of Orange and Orange. So the representatives mentioned several things that I was going to mention about what's going on or what's happened, what we're going to be, or reports we're getting back. But some of the things that I'm particularly going to try to work on, Representative Stebbins mentioned, we shouldn't be building heating systems that are going to last for 20 years without thinking about that. And specifically, I want to have state buildings not be allowed to put in fossil fuel heating in whenever they have to replace heating systems. So they wouldn't have to go and replace them all, but if they have to replace the heating system or it's a new heating system, it would have to be non-fossil fuel system. I've been working on this since 21, I think, or 22. I think hopefully this year we get it passed, at least past the Senate, and it would allow for some exemptions if the state agencies really need to do fossil fuels for temporarily, or if they're just, there could be particular things. So there is a way around it. So I think it's a flexible bill. It's S59. Also, since I'm on transportation, I work on a lot of transportation issues, how we can reduce fossil fuels in our transportation sector. And one way I want to do this year is the fleet requirement. So the state of Vermont has a fleet of vehicles. We passed, I think in 2019, with the help of Senator Ash, the requirement that the fleet increase the number of plug-in vehicles that they have in hybrids. We've met that requirement. The requirement went up to 75% in 21. So now I think it's time to update that and have it go up to 100% of the vehicles and set new targets for the fleet. There's more work that we can do in public transportation, specifically around microtransit. I would like to have more funding there, more funding for bike ped infrastructure, more, continue the support for the clean car rule, which is our best way to transition to an electrified transportation infrastructure. But sort of related is noise and speed, and how those can both make our roads safer, but also less emissions if we also address those and just make our communities more livable. I want to make sure that we're on track to getting the clean heat standard passed in 25. And so I think we did a good job with that bill last year. There's studies and work that's been done by the administration and the agencies, and I just want to make sure we're on top of that and making sure we're set up well for the next year to get that passed. So those are the main things that I'm thinking about from my view on transportation in the Senate.
Thank you, Senator Persick, very much. Thanks to all three of you, and you've listed quite a roster. We now want to go into questions, and we have a few questions to start the discussion off. And I just want to highlight, I see people doing it, but please put your questions into the chat and we'll aim to get to them. So our first question is on renewable energy, and you brought up the Renewable Energy Standard. And the background is we've had a standard since 2015, and Vermont was a leader in the country then, but now many of us feel we're kind of behind many other states. So I want to ask you all three to delve into the plan or possibility of modernizing the Renewable Energy Standard so that we really can get to 100% renewable energy in state and regionally. So I want to start with Representative Sibilia, and then we'll go to Representative Stebbins and then Senator Perchlik. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Linda. I feel optimistic that we will actually get something passed this year to modernize the Renewable Energy Standard. What folks should understand is it is a very tightly balanced agreement, the Renewable Energy Standard. We've got some pretty entrenched folks, really important interests around the table. We have industry, which is suffering from pretty significant, we are suffering, all of us, from pretty significant workforce challenges. And so we have an industry here that we know needs to continue to be of service to our utilities and to Vermonters to build renewable energy. So we need to make sure that that industry survives in this moment, very important moment. We have our environmental advocates whose job is really to push as hard as they can on focusing on emissions reductions, which they do. And we've passed some pretty significant legislation around emissions reductions in the state of Vermont in the last couple of years. I'm really proud of the work that we've done. And then we have our utilities. Vermont has a number of different types of utilities. Most of them are publicly owned. They are municipal or cooperative utilities. And those utilities, for anyone living in central or northern Vermont, you're seeing right now what is happening in the face of climate change with increased outages. And we know that those grids need to, the poles and lines that make up our grids need to continue to be hardened. They need to be moved to the right-of-ways and underground. And our utilities are racing to do that. They are facing some pretty extreme costs in terms of the damages that are happening. And so they're focused on that. So when we think about the Renewable Energy Standard, we're really trying to balance all of those things to make sure that Vermonters, power stays on, they can afford to continue to electrify, which we want them to do for emissions reductions, and that we continue to make progress in terms of renewable energy generation, both for our state and our region. And so it is very difficult work. All of these three interest groups are really, really passionate about what they're doing. But again, I feel like folks have come to the table with a sense of we need to get something done here, and I am optimistic. No announcements today, however. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. And Representative Stebbins?
Thank you. I am definitely keeping an eye on the work that Representative Sibilia and the working group is working on. We know that, there are states around us that have, higher goals, higher percentages of in-state requirements, and that we need to modernize or update, or however you want to frame it, our res. As Representative Sibilia was pointing out, the challenge is there are folks who say, well, let's just get more HQ from Canada, some, more Hydro-Quebec. There are others who say, no, it should be more in-state solar. There are others who say, why can't we build a single wind project in Vermont, which I would be one of them to also push on that. And so it really becomes, or there are folks who say, why don't we just get more of whatever offshore wind there is? But if you've been seeing and monitoring what's going on with offshore wind projects, those also hit a fair amount of NIMBYism. So I'm going to just call it out here that, for all 86 participants here, if we want 100% renewable energy standard, part of that involves seeing what we are building. If we don't assume that we're going to be passing it off onto other people. And if we care about equity, then that means also that we must see this. Flooding upstate or Canadian Indigenous people's land, that is an equity, injustice. So if, as a state, we say we don't want to look at wind and don't want to look at solar, then where are we building and where are we getting this power? So I think that's the real rub that folks are juggling, as well as the cost. And so part of what I'm hoping to see, I didn't mention it earlier, but related to all of the rural communities that Rep. Sibilia was mentioning, we do need to bring in more energy storage and more opportunities for nodes of climate resilience, be it as a result of flooding or as a result of wet snow, or whatever that climate impact might be. We need to be figuring out a way to make more folks at smaller levels in, more microgrid areas to be able to have power if we're going to be shifting more and more people to electrification. So I am looking forward to what the working group comes up with. It is certainly a delicate balancing act. And I think there's a lot of hard conversation here that all interacts, if it's looking at renewables or having housing, and where do we preserve our land. All of those pieces are part of who we will be moving into the future. And those are not easy conversations to have, but ones that are really critical.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, we don't have any really disagreement that we should get to 100% renewable. I don't think there's a utility out there that is saying they don't want to get to 100% renewable. So really, it's the devil's in the details, as Representative Sibilia knows from working on it all the summer and over the years, that there's different ways to get to 100%. And we already have 3 utilities that are at 100%. So I think one of the things that we need to do is look at our other renewable energy programs and kind of form a more coherent package. We have the RES that was formed in 2015 for different reasons at that time. We have net metering that started in 97 and has been changed over the years at different times. We had a standard offer program that I thought was a great program, but it was capped and now it's ended. That was created on its own. So all these different renewable programs that we've had over the years have all been created in their own silo for their own reasons, their own times. And I think it would be great if we could kind of have a overarching coherent plan to increase renewables and meeting those goals that Representative Sibilia made about, affordability and keeping the power reliable and things like that. So I know the Senate Energy Committee is gearing up to take this on. My colleague from Washington District, Senator Watson, is very interested in this and wanting to dig into it, as well as the other senators on that committee. So I agree with Representative Sibilia again that I have confidence that we're going to do something, but it's really how we get to 100%. Like what is that 100% made up is the key thing. Like how much in state, how much of out of state, how much of the large hydro, what about the biomass plants? All those questions are going to come up and be discussed. But I think in the end, we'll end up in a better spot than we are. And hopefully we can also line them up with our other renewable energy policies and requirements that the utilities have to meet.
Thank you. Okay, our next larger topic is responding to climate catastrophe. So this summer, we saw communities across Vermont ravaged by floods and tons of damage and destruction in lives and homes and communities. How does Vermont become resilient to natural disasters like this? And how can we be sure that we're doing that in an environmentally sound way? So with this, I'd like to start with Senator Perchlik, and then Representative Stebbins, and then Representative Sibilia.
Yeah, it's definitely the hot topic going into the session. And there's, I think, literally dozens of bills and different approaches. And there's even some good ideas around some funding. I don't, the amount of funding that we would need is going to be pretty astronomical to get to the point where we're kind of safe from floods. There's, some kind of standard like that. So I think what I'm hoping that we can do is get the money to the projects that we already kind of know are out there. We have organizations that have been working on this problem for decades. Around here, it's been like the River Conservancy, which is based here, but works around the whole state. Friends of Winooski, if you're in other parts of the state, the White River Partnership. There are organizations that are doing good work and have done great work on river corridors throughout the whole state. They just don't have enough money. And in the past, I don't think people have paid as much attention to the good work they're doing. We have river ecologists and watershed ecologists that know what we need to do to slow the rivers down, get the water to get into the ground so it doesn't build up, and then get to the village centers or the city centers and overflood, because we have built our cities along the rivers and our transportation corridors. So there's some good bills out there. Again, I'm not on the committee that's going to be taking these up. I think both the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate and the Environment and Energy Committee in the House is going to have a lot of work to do to kind of prioritize all the different options and figure out what the kind of best bang for their buck is to get the work done that we have to do soon. And then also do the long-term planning, both on the remediation and recreating our river corridors in a way that where they used to be, where they were allowed to break out of their banks. But then also what kind of resilience things can we do to our built environment, whether that's buying property and taking it out of the river corridor, or floodgates, some other kind of hardening. And then I also think this is a good opportunity to look at a lot of our dams that we've built over the years of the river. We have a lot of ghost dams. We have dams that don't produce power. I'm not talking about the dams that produce power, but there's a lot of dams that create obstacles, have a lot of ecological problems, but then also do not help on the whole flooding issue. That hopefully with this relook at our rivers, we can double our efforts and provide some money to take some of those structures out of the rivers, which we get both environmental stream ecology benefits as well as flood benefits. So that's my basic spiel on that topic.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Stebbins.
So in terms of climate resilience, I really see it as falling into, just because of the way my brain works, 3 buckets. We have the bucket of how are we going to pay for all of this? And then which is, finance or money related. And then we have the bucket of and then how do we govern? How are we planning? How are we coordinating? And then we have the third bucket, which I think relates more to what Senator Perchlik was just commenting on, which is, I guess it could also be governance and how we pay for things, but in terms of sort of the natural resource management. So, there are all sorts of initiatives and efforts underway. We all know that the FEMA maps are, not up to date. And even when they do update them, they're really, the 100-year flood is not a 100-year flood. It's more frequent. So there are the pieces of getting our maps right so that we really do have a much better sense of where we simply should not be building. And if we're not going to build there, then what does that mean in terms of where else we build? And what does that mean in terms of if it's private property? How do we hold those pieces together? But there is House Bill 29 and House Bill 30, which relate to rivers and wetlands. And I suspect we'll be discussing those. I'm not chair, but I suspect those will be part of the conversation, given the fact that water remembers where it goes, and it will keep going where it has always gone. So we can try and stop it and prevent it, but it will keep flowing. And then we have, under the governance bucket, there are bills that are being drafted that relate to really how do we respond to climate or to any form of disaster in a timely way. 211 is fantastically organized by volunteers, but maybe we need to step back and reassess whether or not that is as robust as we need it when a storm occurs. Do we know where if someone is renting out a property or if someone is selling a property, is there a disclosure requirement that property has been flooded? Those are some of the pieces that other states have been looking at in terms of making things more transparent and really making sure that our planning pieces and our government pieces are working as effectively as possible when we need them and when we use them. And then the finance piece, there's some bills on the wall that propose new approaches to bring in new income. And hopefully, not hopefully, but we will definitely need to see those come through while also keeping a very clear eye on what's going on with taxes and how Vermonters are paying their bills currently. So I really see climate resilience as sort of all of those three buckets. How are we planning? How are we going to pay for it? And then where are we planning? Where are we building? And is that based on our nature, on where the water is and where our land resources are?
Thank you. Representative Sibilia, you next.
Apologies. Again, looking at how we can help our communities adapt to the energy transition and climate change, which is happening now. So I think I will leave it there.
Thank you. Last question from my end is, you guys have mentioned money and investment. So we know that doing all this work will take money and investment. So fossil fuel companies have been profiting for decades. So do you support the creation of a green super fund that would be funded by them? And what other ways can we ensure that we're investing in the clean energy solutions that we need? So this time I want to start with Representative Stebbins and then go to Representative Sibilia and then Senator Perchlik.
Sure. I haven't seen any bill language on this. So I'm always, I always say I want to read the bill first because I have learned the hard way where I've said, that sounds like a great idea. And then I sign off and then I read it and I go, ooh. And then I hear from a lot of constituents. So at a high level, I like to read bills first. I think there's a lot of support and real interest in understanding that if you're going to make a lot of money on something that is harming many, many billions of people, then there is a price to pay back to society. So I'm definitely interested in seeing what this bill looks like. And I think there's different from like the Affordable Heat Act or from the Renewable Energy Standard, which are very technical, and really get into the details very, very quickly, of which this group is generally, really well versed in all those technical details. My sense of the sort of climate superfund concept, or the make big oil pay that has been mentioned, is that it's really far more direct. It's specifically going to these companies. And I think there would be a real interest in that, because it really does align the responsibility with the responsible party. Of course, there will be always the concern of how does that then trickle down. But we're talking about trillions and trillions of profit. And unfortunately, we do not have a clear federal policy to address this, and that would make a difference. I mean, frankly, even simply stripping our tax credits and our various subsidies for fossil fuels would be a huge boon for renewables, for energy efficiency, and for all of Vermonters if we could just do that too. But that also is at the federal level to many in many ways. So with that, I'll stop.
Okay, and thank you. And now Representative Sibilia, your comment?
Yes, absolutely agree with Representative Stebbins. It's really important. The details are incredibly important in any legislation that we are looking at. So I cannot give blanket support. I do support the concept. I think that it's really important to be cognizant of other systems that we have kind of set in motion here. So in Vermont, with the Clean Heat Standard, we are looking to regulate our local fossil fuel dealers. And I believe that was important and necessary to help both support them and all Vermonters in the energy transition. So when we think about proposals like a make big oil pay, we have to be very careful about not upsetting that system that is in the process of evolving and being built. So making sure that we're able to discern and between, I don't know if discern, but just take into account those things. But yes, I absolutely do support the concept of you cause major harm, you lie, you need to be accountable.
Thank you. Senator Perchik.
Yeah, likewise, my colleagues in the House, they're totally supportive of it. If they made the mess, they got to clean it up. I really like the connection to the Superfund program, although it's a federal program, but it's, I think, very apropos that, if somebody polluted an area, then they have to pay to clean it up, and we'll collect that money from the whole industry and then use it to clean up the mess, which is mainly going to be reducing our uses of fossil fuels going forward. I think it's going to be a long road to hoe. We could pass the bill, but we could pass the bill, and Exxon isn't going to just start sending us money the next day. So there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. I think the lawsuit that the Attorney General filed is an important part of this, and how that plays out, and how the lawsuits and bills in other states play out. I think we're likely for this to work and actually get the money to the Vermont. We're going to probably work with other states in some kind of national agreement on this. And that's what I assume. But so I want to make sure that Vermont is participating with other states and with the Attorney General to make sure that the money does get to us eventually. Because like others have said, it's clear that Big Oil lied about it, they knew about it, and they continue to fund the opposition to any transition. or to any serious transition. So they need to help pay to alter the damage that they've done. But I wouldn't count on the dollars for fixing our problems in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that warning. Now we're turning to the questions coming from all the participants. And so, just a reminder, please keep putting them in the chat. So to continue on the question of funding, how are you working with the governors and state agencies to ensure that all the new federal funds, Inflation Reduction Act and more, are maximally leveraged, and that they are benefiting all Vermonters and Vermont communities? Is there anything that we can do to help on that front? So I'll just open that up. Whoever among you three would like to hop in on that, please do.
Go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, the Joint Fiscal Committee meets over when, we're not in session now, obviously, but the Joint Fiscal Committee's meeting, they meet with the governor's budget staff on a regular basis. And this topic has come up at their meetings about the ARPA money, other federal money, how make sure, one, that we're spending it wisely and spending it so it doesn't get clawed back, but also that we're leveraging it to meet our goals. Sometimes legislative goals might not line up exactly with the governor's, but I think we definitely line up to make sure we're maximizing the federal money and that we're making the best use of it. So there is cooperation on that front, I'd say, between the governor and the legislature on federal funds.
And I would just add, again, Rural Caucus lens, and definitely with support from the Speaker of the House, we have been looking to make sure that, working with the governor, that access is not expanded. The funds are accessible to anyone right now, but the capacity to grab those funds or utilize those funds is not necessarily there for a lot of our communities. So I would say we've been working with the governor's office and again with the speaker's strong support to make sure that all communities have the technical ability to access those funds.
Anything to add, Rep. Stebbins? Okay, on to the next. What can we do to help support you all in pursuing the most bold, ambitious, and equitable policy priorities possible this year and beyond? So how can the energy committees scattered across the state help you all?
I mean, I have thoughts, so happy to share them. I am grateful for each and every energy committee that is out there, talking with your communities, really helping people understand the transition that is happening, whether we want it to or not. And the legislation, there's a lot that Vermont has done that is in motion. Helping the public grapple with what is happening here in Vermont helps us in terms of consideration of additional policies and support for the existing work that is going on.
Yeah, and I echo Representative Sibilia. Thank you. I mean, my first experience with VECAN community members was back in 2008 or 2009 when we were rolling out the community energy efficiency program. Basically, we trained a lot of VECAN members to hold kitchen table conversations with their neighbors about what they might be able to do with their home to reduce their energy bills. And it was a phenomenal project, and it's the importance of having folks on the ground who understand the details and the nuances is really important, because the broad strokes of we need to do all of this becomes much more challenging when you get down to the details. So I guess if I were to ask one thing, it would be to try to hold whatever energy conversations or climate resilience conversations you have in as calm and peaceful and working together fashion as possible. I keep listening to books on tape because I have 2 young children, so I don't get to read a lot, but I keep listening to books on tape about, why we're so polarized. And, how do we get here from 1770s and 1870s and 1970s? And life is not black or white. I mean, life and death is black and white. And we have to vote black and white when we're voting. It's yes or no. But every single one of these policies, if it's, do we need to address 248 or 250, Act 250, or do we need to look at wind or solar, or is it more HQ? Where do we build? If 80% of 80% of Vermont is privately owned, how do we tell private owners, hey, you got to preserve that piece because we all say it's important? These are very hard conversations to have. And to the degree that we can have it in a way that's really calm and respectful and looking towards a future that we are all going to share together, that is what I keep trying to channel when the conversation gets hard.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one. I guess I can think of 3 things that are similar. One is to just keep doing these kind of things, stay informed, participate in VECAN is a great thing. VNRC, others doing great work working with the local energy committees. I was on my local energy committee way back when and found a very rewarding way to work with my neighbors and do some real things on the ground. Because sometimes if you're just in these kind of things talking about statewide policy, it can be frustrating. But if you're trying to just change some light bulbs in your town hall, that can be a positive experience. So I'd say stay involved and keep doing those local energy efficiencies and renewable energy projects, but then keep the pressure on us, but also all the other electeds that you might run into, your state reps, your select boards, the governor, whatever opportunity. We in Vermont have a great blessing that we do run into our legislators and even the governor and others that have influence. So you have chance to keep reminding them that this is a top priority, because sometimes that can kind of slip away amongst all the other things that we deal with the legislature. So they might hear it from the 3 legislators you see on the screen today, but if they hear it from their constituents a lot, that definitely helps.
Thank you. Next question. Burlington uses the social cost of carbon in their procurement processes. How about the state considering using either life cycle costing or the social cost of carbon when evaluating purchasing decisions for vehicles or large capital purchases?
We do use life cycle. We're supposed to be using life cycle cost allocation when the state is making purchasing decisions. I found they don't always do it, or you might disagree with the assumptions they made when they did the life cycle cost analysis. We do use social cost of carbon in our utility regulations and with Efficiency Vermont. So it is in some parts of state government, the social cost of carbon. At least I know it is in the utility regulation sector. I don't think social cost of carbon is in other procurement policies, but the life cycle costing is, and it is something that we have tried to work with. When I mentioned both the fleet vehicles and the heating systems for state buildings, this comes up. That's why you need more of a mandate saying that you shall do this or you shall increase the vehicles this way, because I have found if you just say you have to do the social cost of carbon or life cycle cost analysis, they just come up with the answer that they wanted to have anyway and say that they did it, but still are sticking with the fossil fuel option.
Anybody else, either Rep. Sibilia or Rep. Stebbins? All right.
Because my attorney was reading it as he was thinking 2022.
I'm going to go ahead. Our next one, Representative Stebbins mentioned Act 250 reform. Is there any talk about Act 248 reform? This comes from Jeff Forward. He says, my hope is that no Act 250 reform includes review of renewable energy project. We should not make it harder to build a solar array than it is to build a Walmart. A renewable energy project should not have to go through both Act 250 and Act 248. Comments on that, please. Who wants to jump in first?
I will say I have spent some time on actually our electric lines, the permitting of our electric lines this summer and fall. And so thinking about just in general, electricity generation, this feels like critical infrastructure. We certainly, I think there's room for us to streamline those processes, considering the urgency of the situation and our need to, again, keep the lights on. We need both more energy and hardened lines. We can't just have things put wherever. So, we do have to have some permitting criteria here. I'm not sure that 3 sets of criteria, for instance, a utility is a regulated entity, which may have to get permits from A&R and then also get permits from Act 250. That feels almost like we're trying to stop that from happening as opposed to trying to facilitate it. I think citing of renewable projects is also difficult, but I'm actually not hearing a ton of discussion about, I'm not hearing any discussion about reforming Act 248A. It does not mean it's not happening. So, or 248, excuse me.
Yeah, and the state auditor did just release a report on, what was found with regards to efficiency of permitting projects. It wasn't, it did not come out saying you should do A, B, C, or D. So at this point, I personally have heard, I think I've always heard for like over a decade of how, some projects, fly through, and there are other projects that just fall into this black hole of an abyss. And, the level of transparency is very challenging to figure out where that project went at that point. I'm aware of a few projects right now related to, a similar example. I don't personally know of a bill currently on the wall. I suspect, Representative Sibilia, that we will hear a report back or something regarding 248A, and we will then have, the PUC in the room, and I will certainly be following up to try and find out, what can we do? We spent, I remember back in like 2012, we were like, yes, we're going to have an ePUC. It's going to be this online, updated website, and it's going to answer everything. If I've learned something, it's that IT never answers everything. But the question of like, how do we figure out what those turnaround times are? What percentage projects are meeting them? Why aren't they? If they aren't, that still feels pretty vague to me. And so I will be asking about that for certain when we do have the PUC and the Public Service Department in the room as well. But I'm not aware currently of a particular bill on the wall.
I'll just add that there isn't any, I haven't heard anybody trying to make renewable energy siting projects, generation projects apply for Act 250. It's been clear, and there's been court case precedents that you don't need Act 250 and Section 248. The Section 248 encompasses all the environmental criteria of Act 250. And there's been a couple cases where a project has been cited on a site that has an existing 250 permit. And so people have said they have to get both the Section 248 permission from the PUC plus permission from the Act 250 Commission because they had a standing permit. And the courts have ruled that no, the Act 248, it covers both. And so right now, there isn't an issue of having to do both. There's the issues that were just brought up with the Section 248 process. But as far as the question goes, do we kind of having to do both for a generation project, for a project which is different than the lines that Representative Sebelius was talking about. If you're going to have a project that's going to generate power, that's going to interconnect to the utility, you just need a Section 248 permit.
And I want to exercise the moderator's prerogative and toss out a question that I've had for a while, which is to ask you, do you feel that given the crisis aspect of climate and the need for clean electricity, do you feel that it's appropriate for renewable energy projects to be denied on the basis of aesthetics?
Well, we'd have to change the law if we don't want to have aesthetics be part of it. I think, as the way you phrase your question, you would say, no, you shouldn't deny it. But I think there probably are examples where the aesthetics do raise enough of a concern. So it's not always just let's get rid of the aesthetic criteria entirely. But I think the way that the term is it shocking and offensive to the average person? I think we could do work on that. I think it shouldn't be a determinative factor, that's for sure. And I think for wind turbines, what I'm more concerned about is the noise level. And I think we're being, as a state, kind of hypocritical that we're saying, well, if you want to build a wind project, you have to keep the noise below 30, I think it's 35 decibels at night, but you can drive your car at 90 decibels. You can have a motorcycle and you could drive down the road and disrupt the sleep of hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, at 100 decibels. And that's okay. And there's a bunch of other examples I could give where we're not consistent with our noise regulations.
Yeah, and I'd echo. I mean, what Senator Perchlik was saying. One could argue that putting solar on the front lawn of the state capitol, like that, would aesthetically not be an appropriate location. So, going back to my earlier black and white statement, I don't. It's there are certain places where it may not make sense to locate. Frankly, anything except maybe grass or whatever is currently there. That being said, it's very, very challenging that we're comfortable with gas stations. We're comfortable with so many other visual experiences, but then when it comes to renewable energy, we have this criteria determination that has been able to stop projects. That when stepping back, we all want to turn the light switch on. We all want to have our refrigerator work. We want our heat pump going. So I do have a lot of concerns with how we put into regulation or statute ways that can be used to block projects, be they renewables or housing. That being said, we all love Vermont, and we want to be thoughtful about how we develop in Vermont. So sorry to not give you a black and white yes or no answer. I do think there are problems currently with the fact that we're seeing projects be denied. I also think, I personally had picked up the phone when I was head of Renewable Energy Vermont and said, could you plant more trees? Could you just make my life a little bit easier and plant more trees along your solar array so that, we could split the middle? And so I feel like there are opportunities for us to figure out a better path forward.
I think my colleagues have addressed.
That's fine. Okay. Next question is, are there plans to address grid upgrades so that there will be capacity to deliver energy for a fully electrified society? Grid upgrades.
I'll just throw out there, I think this question is like a bigger picture question. I mean, our utilities do this, every 3 years for a 20-year planning horizon. So does Velco. Our utilities, this is what they show up to do on a regular basis. I think the bigger question of how does Vermont relate to ISO New England, relate to larger transmission projects, that is certainly something that we're going to see come up more as we see more, not just Vermont, but all of the Northeast region shift towards more renewables and shift towards more electrification. So I think we're going to have to, and we should be proactive about it. I'm beyond, some discussions about energy storage or what is the role around RES moving forward, and the utilities and Velco's current planning processes. For the next 5 months, January to May of 2024, I'm not currently aware of anything right now specifically.
Yeah, I would say generally that again, our utilities and Velco are heavily regulated. They are required, both in-state and regionally. They are required to do this planning. Velco has projected that we do have enough power for, I think it's the next, not forever, or capacity, not forever, but for the next foreseeable future. This is work, as I referenced earlier, hardening our grid is something I think that all of our utilities are thinking about and working on. It's a tremendous investment that is necessary there. That's something I certainly am hopeful we can find some additional investment for, particularly for our municipal utilities. And I guess I wonder about this question sometimes, and if it's really related to more about so that we, like, if the rest of the question is so that we can put more solar or utility or renewable energy wherever we would like it in the state. So we have areas of the state where you can't build, like in the Shia, but we don't have a lot of load there, However, energy is continuing to transition with storage and improvements in the grid. I expect that will continue. So I feel confident in the grid that we have now, in terms of its capacity to handle the energy that's there. A lot of it needs to be hardened for climate change, to keep the poles and wires up. And I guess I will leave it there. So I'm not, the thing that I'm most concerned about is just actually the actual effects of the extreme weather, not the ability to handle the energy. I think our utilities and transmission utility are doing a good job there.
Yeah, I would echo that. So the short answer is yes to the question, but the bigger issue is more about how we're dealing with the power that we're generating kind of behind our meters and at the local level, and how this all flows and what the visibility is for the utilities of all this customer sided generation, and how that interplays with all the power that we're bringing from Canada or from upstate New York, or maybe in the future from offshore wind. So that all work is going on and people are thinking about it. But what I've heard more recently is, and the state and utilities are applying for a lot of federal money to help with some of this stuff. It's really on the micro level, like especially the smaller utilities having trouble with just getting transformers and having their customers' electrical panels be enough to put in a heat pump or electric car charger. So that's more we're seeing a problem in this transition than how are we going to get enough power? How are we going to get it to Vermont? It's really like, how do we just get somebody an electric car charger that lives out in a small utility in a rural area that was, when their electric service was put in, was not thought, they weren't thinking that they were going to electrify everything. But now that we're going to get there, how do we help them do that in a cost-effective way?
All right, thank you. Next is, as a legislator, can you all tell us what's the best way for local energy leaders to communicate with you during the session? How can we best stay tuned to what's going on?
It's a good question, and it's probably one of the most common questions, actually, I think, that I get on just general legislative forums. And I still don't have a real good answer. I'd say the best way would be to actually be in the State House, but that's not a practical way to do both talk to us and keep informed of what's going on. And not everybody could do that. But I think being active in groups like VECAN are a great way to be informed, because you have active people that are in the building that kind of can separate the wheat from the chaff and give you the most important things in digestible bits. So, your trusted organizations, becoming members of them and paying attention to the information they're putting out. But, for me, it is probably email or phone, but the problem is just the volume of emails and calls that we get. It's hard to keep up and respond to everybody, that's for sure. But that's my answer.
Yeah. One of the hosts of this VNRC puts out regular information. So that's a great initial step to stay informed. And then, yeah, I'd echo Senator Perchlik's statement. For me personally, it's email. But that being said, if you send a really easy question, I sometimes am able to respond very quickly. But if you send a thoughtful, hard conversation, I usually need a little bit of time to step back and absorb and think about how best can I answer you. So, and then also just how many emails we get. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't email us. You should still do it.
Yeah, I would echo everything that my colleagues have said. I would add, if you are not familiar with the legislative website or the committee pages and how those work, familiarizing yourself with those will be helpful. Also, the Joint Fiscal Office page has a lot of information, so it may help you answer some of your own questions or narrow the questioning that you need answered from us. And I would say VNRC, Joey and Dan, I see them every day in the State House. And so, if you have really specific questions, definitely also make sure you're channeling those in through them. That can be an additional means of getting to us.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to note that I, as a user, I can say that I think the web page for the legislature is actually pretty good and pretty easy to navigate through. So I do recommend that. And people will hopefully have seen in the chat the link to the climate dispatch that Joey and others work on. And typically once the session is going, that's a weekly thing. So that's a very good way you can sign up and get notices so that you don't have to remember to go look for it. The next question is, can someone speak to the status of hydro in our state? It seems to be a no-go for new development, even run-of-the-river systems with less ecological impacts. Is this something being pursued?
Was that a hydro question? I was reading it.
Yeah. That's the hydro question in state,
Yeah.
even run of the river, hard to get permitted.
The main problem is that you need a federal permit. You need a state water quality permit as part of the federal permitting. But we are as environmentalists have succeeded in making the permitting very vigorous to protect stream ecology, which is a good thing, but it makes it difficult to generate power. And the federal process is not easy and takes a lot of time and money to get through. We have had a couple projects built, actually, small projects, but it's been due to people's just strong dedication to see it through. And then you got to go through relicensing. So a few years ago, I think before I was in the legislature, when I was at Rev, that we did create a state kind of task force between the different agencies. So like the energy office and the ANR, environmental office, were talking together about because when you talk to folks at ANR that do the water quality permits, they say like, yeah, some of these run-of-river projects would be fine, but to get them to the point where they can identify those and help the projects get a permit was being difficult. So I think technically that task force is still exists and is there to help projects that the state thinks are permittable, but it just doesn't happen very often. And the staff have 101 other things that they're doing, so that's kind of the state of things. It is possible. It just takes a lot of work. It has to be the right site, and you need a lot of money and some good lawyers.
Yeah, it's really hard. When I was head of Rev after Senator Perchlik, I do remember testifying to try to support, if I recall correctly, it was a memorandum of understanding amongst the various state agencies and then the federal government to allow for some select pilot micro and I never know if you say, it must be pico, like super tiny, so that someone who might want to just have a very small generating system, connected to their property, not a larger run-of-river dam, but so that could be explored more fully. And I don't know where that went. I will say it's challenging to this is an example of holding two challenging pieces at the same time. We're talking climate resilience, where frankly, dams, depending on the dam, depending on the age, depending on the use, the structure, the sediment behind it, the dam should probably come down for either future flooding or for water quality, health, etc. But we're also looking for ways to have more clean electricity. So I don't imagine it becoming, the statement says it seems to be a no-go for new development. I think it's fair to say it'll be very challenging and expensive to see, more of those types of projects.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Okay, I'm going to go on, and so this will be our last question, because we'll let our legislators wrap up for us too. And this is rather long, so and covers a bunch of different topics. So, what can you comment on potential state policies to address carbon emissions in Vermont in ways that keep rural and racial equity intact? For example, assisting towns in removing diesel snowplows off the road and reducing the number of private snow plowers roaming with less snow on the ground, weatherization and rehabilitation of the older housing stock to limit rural residential sprawl of newer housing, mitigate energy loss, and reduce or eliminate private gas fuel consumption. Where is the state's approach and understanding on addressing these daily usages that are becoming more antiquated with each passing season? So it seems to cover towns and then housing as well as transportation. So whatever you have on that, that's very broad.
So, I will say that we have been focusing on building systems to address these issues. It's much harder. Again, capacity issues in rural communities. There's less people, but less people to do things as well. And so it's something that I will be continuing to look at. What are systemic ways? We certainly benefited from ARPA funding in that regard. So the Municipal Energy Resilience Program, that's a boatload of money that came in, not nearly enough to do all of our municipal buildings, but enough to at least get our communities really thinking about the work that is needed in their communities and do a project. You know, we're not necessarily anticipating more boatloads of money like that, although there's a ton of IIJA money. So, you know, I would say we're continuing to think that way. I'll just flag for folks as a point of interest. Living in a rural area, I find that the notion of rural sprawl, the phrase rural sprawl, to actually be offensive. I've actually asked for the various study committees working on Act 250 to actually define what that means. I think we have to be very careful and remember that there are people that live in these rural communities that also want to be safe and to protect our environment, and we should not use shorthand to talk about the places that they live. So I guess I'll stop there.
And anybody else? Representative Stebbins or Senator Perchlik?
I was just going to say that Representative Sibilia has done a great job of focusing our efforts on rural areas and the, you know, how the municipalities, you know, that have snowplows and little town offices that they got to heat and power, because a lot of the effort, I think, prior has been on big projects like big generation projects, or just focused on generation and what the state can do. But as you all know, being on town energy committees, there's a lot happening on the towns and there's a lot of interest there. And so it's a good question. And I think it's been good work that Sibilia has done to say, like, hey, well, how do we support these towns in this transition, specifically the towns that are disadvantaged, that just don't have the same resources, don't have grants managers that can, you know, easily apply for funds. We do have some towns that are small, but they're kind of overachievers because they're just very active and have staff and have volunteers that have time and money to really help their towns. And those are great for showing what a town can do, but the state does need to help a lot of other towns to get there and make it work.
Yeah, and I when I heard that question, I guess I would say I feel like there are a lot of pieces that the legislature is working on to address, if it's a transportation component, or if it's a, you know, a town support component, or if it's you know, weatherizing home component, and you know, the challenge is ultimately you do need to split things up into smaller, you know, smaller workable bite-sized projects. But at a holistic level, how do we make sure that we're keeping, you know, keeping the opportunity available to all sorts of communities and all sorts of Vermonters? I do think we're making headway on this. I'm also amazed at how much of what we do takes a long time to get out. You know, when we vote on something and we end the budget vote in May or June, it can take months or years to actually see that, you know, make its way through state government. And then also, you know, it depends on how broadly it's communicated, and to what Senator Perchlik and Rep. Sibilia have pointed to. Particularly if you're a small town, you may not have the resources or the staff or the capacity to capitalize on a lot of the opportunities that may or may not be available to you. So I feel like we've done a fair amount. Whether or not we've communicated it well is questionable, and whether or not it's actually gotten out of the door is another question. But the point is heard to keep this front and center in mind as we head back in January. And I also just want to say, you know, the most challenging part is someone who has a lot of financial resources can build their home wherever they want, probably, if they want to. Not wherever. I mean, obviously, if it's a protected forest or whatnot. But the challenge is more for everybody else who may not have the resources, who may not have the capacity, who may not have the money. And that's really where we need to make sure that folks are able to live here and get to their work and, you know, heat their homes. And that's what we will keep focusing on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now what we want to do is wrap up. And so I want to ask each of you, give you a minute or so to just make any last comments that you want to be sure that we all hear. So I want to go in this order: Senator Perchlik first, and then Representative Stebbins, and then Representative Sibilia. So just any additional comments you have.
Just thank you for doing this, and thanks for all the Energy Committee members that were here that are paying attention and keeping us honest, and then also doing the good work. And it helps us to do better work, to know that you're all out there thinking about these things and cheering us on or bugging us to do better. That's helpful, and it gives us both energy and ideas to carry forward and get this important work done. And we definitely need to do it together, both us in the building getting the votes, but you out on the streets and in the fields to make the work happen, and to keep the pressure from outside the building on our colleagues to keep it as a top priority. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Stebbins?
I echo Senator Perchlik. It really does matter that you're out there and that you're keeping informed and up to date. There's such a challenge between when you're in the building working on something and then when you're outside working to support from outside. So do feel comfortable emailing, and do know that what you're doing is really, really, really critical, because ultimately, if we don't have folks outside of the building that are saying, focus on these issues, focus on making sure we develop and we prosper in Vermont in a way that is sustainable and affordable, then that gets lost, or it can get lost. So it really does matter, even if you feel like it might be, a couple of degrees removed. So thank you all.
Thanks. And Representative Sibilia?
Yeah, I would just point to the fact that Vermont does not have county government. Vermont has some regional structures, but we have a state, and then we've got municipalities and cities of varying sizes. You all are critical pieces of Vermont's energy transition. And to the extent that you have time, ability, and inclination to look around you to your neighboring towns and to see if they also have energy committees, or could use assistance with their energy committee, I think that's something else that you all could do that would be helpful. Cannot stress enough how important your work is. Who is on the ground in your community to receive and interpret and engage with all of these policies if it is not for you. So thank you very much, and thanks for having us today.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much. And now I definitely want to give you another huge thank you for spending your time with us today. And so now I've got a bunch of different things to let everybody attending know about. So we've got our third final webinar in this virtual conference. So that's a Town Energy Committee peer-to-peer roundtable. So Senator Sibilia gave us a perfect segue to that. So that's tomorrow, and that's at 12 again. So if you're a Town Energy Committee member, please join us, and you can share successes and brainstorm, and we can collaborate. So in the chat will be the registration link. And then I want to let you know, over the past 4 years, VNRC has helped develop a network through which you can be active on policy and legislation. And mostly this is through email. And so if you want to join, you can send an email to Dan Fingus, who's the VECAN coordinator, and he'll have that in the chat. And then we've already mentioned the climate dispatch, and so you can sign up to get email reminders about that so that you'll know when they're coming out and can go. These are very short, easy to go through videos to give you a summary of what's the highlights of what's happening in the legislature. Then there's also a series of policy webinars this month and in January. And so the links for registering for them are in the chat. So they include modernizing the Renewable Energy Standard. That's on the 15th next week. And then Make Big Oil Pay. That's December 18th. And then Climate Resilience. And that's on January 8th. So that wraps it up, and we're very, very close to 1:30, so we've managed the time pretty well. So thank you very much. I appreciate everybody being here, and we'll see you in the State House, right?